Hey everyone. I figured before I get started on with the new episode, I'd apologize for missing last week. I've had a lot going on recently. I recently bought a new car. Um, work has just been busy and life just really just got in the way. Um, but I am back with another episode and I'm excited to get started. So, with that said, um, I'd like to welcome you all back to Self-Advocacy Matters, and today we are talking about Brad Lomax. Now, Brad Lomax was born in 1950 in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, the city of brotherly love, cheesesteaks, and a very inconsistent sports fan base. But more importantly, Philly was also a place where Black communities were pushing back hard against segregation, poverty, and policing. Brad grew up during a time of enormous tension and transformation. Think about it. This was the era of Martin Luther King Jr., Malcolm X, sit-ins, and marches. It was a time when young Black kids weren't just watching history, they were living it. And Brad, he wasn't the type to sit on the sidelines, though ironically, he would later sit at the very front of multiple movements, but we'll get into that. At 18, Brad had just graduated high school and was heading to college when he was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, a progressive disease that attacks the central nervous system. One minute you're a teenager trying to figure out how to sneak into a James Brown concert, and the next minute your body starts betraying you in slow motion. The symptoms crept in: trouble walking, extreme fatigue, loss of motor control. Over the next few years, Brad began using a wheelchair, which is when he realized something devastating. America wasn't just built without disabled people in mind. It was practically built to keep them out. Sidewalks had curbs, but no curb cuts. Public transit, accessible in the same way a locked bank vault is technically accessible if you're Tom Cruise in Mission Impossible. And don't even get him started on bathrooms because he couldn't even get started on bathrooms. No ramps, no elevators, no doors that didn't weigh 3,000 pounds. But beyond the physical barriers were the attitudes. People would talk at him like he was a child, or worse, like he wasn't even there. If you're Black and disabled in America, you don't just get ignored, you get ignored twice. Brad was like, cool. So I'm a second class citizen now, or I'm a second class citizen twice over. Excellent. But here's the thing. Instead of getting bitter, he got better. Better at organizing, at strategizing, at connecting the dots between racism and ableism. Brad understood that these systems of oppression didn't exist in silos. They were a tag team. And as a student at Howard University, a historically Black college in Washington, D.C., Brad was surrounded by young people who were fired up and ready to challenge the system. And he brought the same fire with him right into the disability rights movement. So now you've got a guy who's young, Black, disabled, smart, politically engaged, and armed with a revolutionary mindset. In short, the government's worst nightmare. But seriously, Brad didn't come out swinging just for himself. He understood something far bigger, that if movements for justice didn't include disabled people, especially Black disabled people, they weren't really fighting for liberation. They were just redesigning the gates. And so began his journey as a bridge builder, linking civil rights and disability rights. Two movements, one wheelchair, one mission. But before we get into the revolutions and the sit-ins and the Black Panther collabs, just remember this. Brad Lomax wasn't a hero because of what happened to him. He was a hero because of what he did with it. So, picture this. It's the mid 1970s. America is still riding the hangover from Vietnam. Watergate, as everyone's side-eyeing the government, and disco is somehow both awesome and terrible at the same time. And Brad Lomax, he's in the Bay Area, and he's about to make history again. Now, by this point, Brad had fully stepped into the world of activism. But unlike some activists who find one cause and stick to it like it's their favorite flavor of ice cream, Brad was more like, why not fight two systems of oppression at the same time? Seems chill. And here's where things get extra bold. Brad didn't just join the Black Panther Party, he brought disability rights with him. Now, the Black Panther Party, in case you need a refresher, was not just about black leather jackets, afros, and scary headlines from nervous white newspapers. They were about radical community care, free breakfast programs, health clinics, liberation schools, and yeah, they were also about self-defense, but mostly because the police were not great at the protect part of protect and serve. Brad saw what the Panthers were doing and thought, this is it. This is what disabled people need too. Community, power, infrastructure. So he pitched a bold idea. Open a center for independent living in East Oakland, right in the heart of the Black community, not in the white liberal bubble of Berkeley, where the first Center for Independent Living had already been founded. No, Brad wanted to bring disability services to the people who were left out of every conversation. Let's take a second here. That idea, that was not just brilliant, that's visionary. Because most disability services at the time, when they existed at all, were in super white, super middle class spaces. If you were Black and disabled, good luck finding that help that didn't come with a side of condensation or a 6-month wait list. So, Brad connects the Panthers with Berkeley Center for Independent Living, led by Ed Roberts, a white quadriplegic activist known as the father of independent living, and a guy who looked like your high school civics teacher but had the heart of a street level revolutionary. This was a team up no one saw coming. Think Black Panthers meet Berkeley disability rights nerds, like a Marvel crossover, but with more organizing meetings and fewer capes. And it worked. In 1975, they launched the East Oakland Center for Independent Living, providing disability services, advocacy, and support to community that had been utterly ignored. They were giving out wheelchairs and information with the same energy the Panthers gave out free breakfast, and in some cases, to the same people. This was intersectionality before intersectionality was a thing you'd see in academic journals or on tote bags. Brad Lomax wasn't just participating in two movements, he was fusing them. He was proving by example that civil rights and disability rights aren't two separate fights. They're chapters in the same damn book. And guess what? That alliance, it laid the groundwork for something even bigger, something that would shake up the entire country. But that's next. Okay, now we're in 1977. And if you're thinking that was a long time ago, just remember the same year these events happened, Star Wars came out, Fleetwood Mac released rumors, and Elvis Presley died on a toilet. This is not ancient history. This is polyester pants history. Now, let's talk about a little thing called Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act. Passed in 1973, this was supposed to be the first federal civil rights protection for disabled people. It said, brace yourself for this radical idea that if you're a program or service receiving federal money, you can't discriminate against people with disabilities. Basic stuff, right? Like, don't exclude disabled people from your school, job, bus, building, or public service levels of obvious. But here's the kicker. The government passed it and then just refused to sign the regulations that would actually make it enforceable. It's like passing a law that says everyone gets free pizza and then just not making any pizza. Not even the bad kind with the weird pineapple. So for 4 years, Disabled activists pushed and lobbied and begged and testified. Nothing happened until April 5th, 1977, when hundreds of activists across the country said, you know what? No more. They staged protests and occupied federal buildings. And in San Francisco, they took over the regional office of the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare and stayed for 26 days. That's right. The 504 sit-in became the longest nonviolent occupation of a federal building in U.S. history. Take that. Revolutionaries with snack limits. And guess who was there? Brad Lomax, in his wheelchair, at the heart of it. But remember, this wasn't just about him showing up. This is about what he brought with him. Because Brad, he had connections. Specifically, the Black Panther Party. When the sit-in began and food supplies ran low, it wasn't the government or the Red Cross or Whole Foods with a guilty conscience that showed up. It was the Black Panthers. They delivered hot meals day after day to protesters inside the building, and they didn't ask for media credit or a photo op. They just showed up because Brad asked and because solidarity means something. Now, let's pause here. This moment, disabled activists occupying a building fed and supported by a revolutionary Black Power group is one of the most quietly radical moments in American history. And yet it's barely taught in schools, probably because it doesn't fit cleanly into anyone's textbook chapter title. But make no mistake, this was a blueprint for how movements should work. It was Black-led, disabled-led, grassroots, independent, and wildly effective. Because guess what? It worked. After 26 days and a whole lot of pressure, the Secretary of HEW finally signed the Section 504 regulations into law. The disability rights movement had its first major legal win, and it happened because people like Brad Lomax said, "We will not be ignored, and we will not fight alone." Brad didn't just help win that battle, he redefined the way it was fought. This wasn't just activism, it was access meets resistance. It was civil disobedience with a side of community care. It was history in motion on wheels. So, here's the part that hurts a little. Brad Lomax died in 1984 at just 33 years old. 33. Most people at 33 are just figuring out how to do their taxes without crying, or finally accepting that they'll never finish infinite jest. But Brad, he had already changed two movements. Now let's be clear, he didn't die a household name. There were no parades, no buildings named after him, no glossy HBO documentary. In fact, for decades, Brad Lomax's name was largely left out of the story, buried beneath more famous names like Ed Roberts in disability history or Huey Newton in Black Panther lore. And no shade to those guys, they did important work. But Brad's role, absolutely central, absolutely intersectional, and absolutely underrated. So let's talk about what he left behind. First, the 504 sit-in wasn't just a protest. It was a turning point. That win paved the way for something even bigger. The Americans with Disabilities Act passed in 1990. And no, Brad didn't live to see it. But the ADA has his fingerprints all over it. Every time a kid in a wheelchair can go to school with their classmates. Every time a bus has a lift. Every time there's captioning in a movie or a job interview that doesn't illegally discriminate. That's the ripple effect of 504. That's Brad's legacy. Second, the East Oakland CIL, that partnership between the Panthers and the disability rights movement, that was the blueprint for intersectional organizing. You want to talk about coalition building? Brad was doing that when half the country was still arguing about whether disco was real music. He proved that disabled people of color need their own space within the movement, and that the fight for access has to include access to Black communities, poor communities, and underserved communities, not just the white liberal ones with bike lanes and farmers markets. He wasn't just ahead of his time, he was ahead of our time. And here's the kicker. For years, disability history was told like it was this parade of white guys in motorized chairs and policy briefings. But Brad Lomax reminds us disability justice isn't a side issue. Black disabled people aren't footnotes, they are founders. He didn't ask to be the symbol of a movement. He just asked to get on a bus, go to school, live his life. And when he realized those basic things were being denied to people like him, he said, "Cool, guess I'm organizing a revolution now." Mic drop from a seated position. So, what do we take away from Brad Lomax's story? First, if there's one thing Brad teaches us, it's this. Justice isn't a buffet. You can't pick and choose which parts you want. You don't get to say, I want racial justice, but no disability justice, or I want disability rights, but I don't want to think about race. Justice means all of it. Because people like Brad live at the intersections where systems overlap, where oppressions stack up, and where the fight for dignity can get really complicated. He showed us how to build bridges between movements, how to create coalitions that actually include everyone, and how to fight together instead of fighting over who gets to be seen. And honestly, that's still one of the hardest things for social movements today. Brad also reminds us that activism looks different for different people. Sometimes it's marching. Sometimes it's sitting in a federal building for nearly a month. Sometimes it's building community centers in the neighborhoods that need them most. And sometimes it's just showing up, even when the world would rather you stay invisible. His life is a reminder that liberation is about power sharing, not power hoarding, about empathy and coalition building, not just shouting slogans. If you think about it, Brad Lomax is kind of like the OG of intersectionality. So next time you hear about civil rights or disability rights or social justice, remember him. Because the man who didn't have the luxury of choosing one fight, so he fought all of them. Because true justice isn't just about surviving, it's about thriving in a world that was never built for all of us. Thank you so much for listening to Self-Advocacy Matters. If Brad Lomax's story moved you, share this episode with a friend. Let's make sure voices like his get louder, not quieter. Next week, we'll dive into another trailblazer who changed the game in their own unforgettable way. Until then, keep fighting the good fight. And remember, change often comes on wheels. And hey, if Brad Lomax were alive today, let's be real, he'd probably be running a cross-movement, nonprofit, live streaming sit-ins and subtweeting Congress with fire. The man would have a blue check, a podcast, and a Merc line. Hashtag roll for justice, anyone?